Sorrow of the Blood Bot, and been working on that a while. Did an edit off screen today, and so that should be pretty close to complete. 10.4 ABBT9 was not the first model of his kind. He was not really a prototype either, but bigger ones would be built in the future. The first couple times he was activated were systems checks that did not involve much of his artificial intelligence. The first day he remembered clearly was when Carrie, his technician, placed him on a wet table in the center of a very nice conference room. Lots of dark wood and built-ins with antiques on display. He would never be in a room this nice again. Most of the men in fine suits around the room were seated old and white, but a few stood up and leered over the little bot. They were all wealthy as well, but the little bot had no way of knowing that or understanding it. They had paid for the creation and development of 10.4 ABBT9 and all the models that followed him. Carrie poured out an oily substance with red tinting to it over the recessed surface of the wet table. A little of it oozed up against and beneath the treads of his tracks. This did not distress him much. All those peering eyes were so very fascinating. She gave an introduction that the little bot had trouble attending to, but then she activated him by a switch on a remote. He lifted his arms attached to the little vacuum and began sweeping the oily substance into one confined area. Then he activated the suction. It was specially designed not to create any profane or offensive sucking or gurgling noises. When he took up the bulk of the spill, he swept the surface of the wet table clean and slurped up the rest. Carrie ran a finger over the table and held it up to show it was dry. The men applauded, and the bot did a little pre-programmed dance. After a set period of service had passed, Carrie opened the bot's display case and transported him to a small lab. There she started cleaning out his joints and tubes. As she did so, Carrie said, "You're doing great, 10.4. Soon you will have many, many friends." 10.4 noted and recorded the words he did not yet have a reference for in his memory. She returned him to his display case and patted the top of his head above his sensors before closing him in. He had just been introduced to the concept of friends and friendship, but he had no references other than Carrie and how she treated him. He made note of it under the category of friend. More people showed up, and 10.4 lifted his little vac to salute them. A couple of the younger friends giggled. One of them pushed the button, and more of that oily red stuff spilled out over the edge of the floor of his display case. The friends made groaning noises, and 10.4 did his little pre-programmed dance. His treads ran through the liquid and spread out the mess. There were more groans, but he did not have time. He had no time to dance again. All right. He started turning in place as he swept the substance into one area. He vacuumed, swept together the remnant, and vacked again. No applause, so he just gave a lifted salute as they walked away giggling. He took another moment while no one was looking to clean his own treads too, and then gave the display case floor another cleaning just to be sure. Carrie walked by the other way with another bot different from 10.4. She winked, and he raised his vac arms in salute. Another friend, this one tall with droopy eyes, pushed the button. Another spill spread out. 10.4 waited until the bleeding tapered off, and he started cleaning his assigned space. No applause followed before the lone friend strolled away. 10.4 centered himself, and that was it for a while. Carrie started to pass him in his display case as she did most mornings each week. 10.4 had calculated that it was usually a 5 days on and 2 days off pattern, although sometimes there were extra days off and some stretches with no days off. She waved as she always did on the mornings of her days here. 10.4 lifted his vac in salute as he always did. Carrie paused, turned back, and opened his case. It must have been time for another adjustment. She took him to her little lab and set him on the table. Instead of taking him apart, she took out a solid substance and started feeding her own vac. Each time she lifted the solids to her vac opening, 10.4 lifted his vac in salute. Carrie patted his head and said, "You don't always have to do that every time, 10.4. He's spent a lot of time trying to process this. Which times? Under what conditions? More data was needed." While he worked on this ambiguous problem, she spoke of her life and the calculations outside this facility that baffled her. She was changing. 10-4 still recognized her, but some of her features were shifting. More wrinkles in the skin, more gray in the hair. He centered her face in his sensors and took another picture to use for recognition. This would not be the last updated image he would take over the next few years. She finished vacuuming up her solids, but left some crumb debris. Good to see you again, too, Kedman. Glad you're here. 10-4 was programmed for thick liquids, but not solids. He thought he should try anyway. It seemed like the sort of thing a friend would do, and Carrie was categorized under friend in his memory. Thank you, man. Under friend in his memory. 10-4 rolled forward and prepared to sweep the crumbs together. Before he could, she gathered them up first in a paper and disposed of them herself. As she took him back to his display case, she said, "That wasn't your job." Another instruction with confusing data. This was not the last time that 10-4 would go to her lab at the beginning of days. There was no pattern to these visits he could decipher, but they always seemed to happen when she had calculations outside the facility that were difficult for her. 10-4 never really seemed to help directly with these calculations, but Carrie seemed satisfied with his work and his presence anyway. Over time, there were fewer and fewer friends visiting the facility. The button on his display was rarely pushed. There were more arguments in the hallways between technicians and not much giggling or applause anymore. 10-4 waited and observed between trips to Carrie's lab. The last time 10-4 saw Carrie, she staggered up the hall with other robots attacking her. She managed to hide from them. As they passed, 10-4 tried to salute her where she stood very still in the shadows. She did not wave back. This was the first time she ever failed to do that. Oh, I have one typo, and I thought I almost made it. This was the first time she ever failed to do that. 10-4 thought this might be one of those times when he didn't have to do it. The first, let's say, well, I'm going to add here. So satisfied with my new glasses, finally I can use my reading glasses. There you go, Kedman. You can buy some cheaper paperbacks with smaller writing, too. 10-4 thought this might be one of those times when he didn't have to do it either. The larger bots with their weapons and thundering feet continued up the corridor another way. Screams and cries filled the building. 10-4 performed his little pre-programmed dance. His treads were getting sticky and unreliable. Carrie lurched and staggered toward him. She must have been coming for his regular maintenance check. But she just leaned against his display case and smeared it with the red oily stuff. He rolled forward and tried to clean away the red handprint, but it was on the outside. Her face was different. There were cuts and burns. One of her eyes appeared damaged. He took an updated image of her for future recognition. Carrie fell out of his range of sight. He thought that might be it until morning, but then his case tilted and partially shattered on the floor. 10-4 accessed old programming to use his arms and treads to right himself again. Then he cleaned the red handprint off the surviving portion of his display case door on the floor. Carrie laid on her stomach with her face toward him. Her eyes stared in a different sort of way, but he recognized her from the most recent image he had on file. As the substance bled out from under her, 10-4 went to work. He scooped and vacuumed as fast as he could, but it kept coming. Soon he filled up, and she stopped producing the red stuff. He started to roll back to where his display case had stood, but then he saw the red tracks he left behind. He started cleaning himself and then his tracks. Before he could finish, one of his seams broke and the stuff started to bleed out of him. 10-4 didn't panic. He just swept the liquids back together and re-vacuumed them. When they bled out again, he cleaned up once more. And so the day continued as Carrie lay still beside him. There were more screams and crashes. More people fell. More of the substance spread out on the floor. 10-4 knew it was his job, but he continued to clean up the stuff he had taken from Carrie's spill each time it leaked back out of him. Eventually, the other robots left the building and no other humans came. A few faint screams rose from outside, but were very distant while they lasted. 10-4 went on cleaning the same spill over and over. As time passed, the substance bled out of him slower until it finally coagulated in his tanks in one heavy knot. He wanted to do his little dance when the job was finally finished, but no one was clapping. He tried to move his treads, but they were gummed up and went from simply halting to totally locked under him. He was past his time for maintenance. Looking up, he saw Carrie's face had changed again. The color of her skin, the shape of her unmoving eyes, the spreading blackness around her wounds. He decided to take one more picture so he would not forget who she was. As he felt his system shutting down inside him, he lifted his arms and his vac one more time in salute to his friend. She had not waved, but he thought it would be okay. Scanning past her, he spied many more puddles. Most had hardened on their own, much like Carrie's spill, now safe inside him. He decided this was one of those times that it wasn't his job anymore. Things started to go black. He was not particularly concerned. Like Carrie had said, he didn't always have to. Dark, darker, black.